Look, it's a fair question, and I appreciate you wanting to understand. Have you got a few minutes to talk about it? So the obvious reality is that in our society, there's a spectrum of views on the topic of sexual and moral ethics. At one end of the spectrum, it's very restrictive. At the other end of the spectrum, it's very unrestrictive. Now, Christians have always been towards the top, not necessarily as restrictive as they're perceived to be sometimes, but pretty restrictive. Even 40 years ago, the majority of society was more like down here. At that point, the difference between Christians and the majority wasn't quite so marked. But society has moved in some significant ways, especially in the area of sexual ethics. So in that area, modern Western people most commonly are now down here. So the difference has become much greater. And that's actually not because Christians have changed, it's because society has. So why have Christians not changed too? And it's easy to allege that Christians are just hopelessly stuck in the past and haven't kept up. But that's actually a bit baffling because Christians otherwise seem like, I hope, quite decent, reasonably intelligent, very ordinary, modern people who've kept up with a lot of other changes in society. So what's going on? How do such similar people arrive at such different positions? And the answer to that is that despite being very similar on the surface, there are some very major differences in the route they've taken to arrive at their respective positions. Are you happy for me to explain what I mean? So to the left of this spectrum, I'm going to draw a flow diagram. And all the way to the left, I'm going to start with this question. Is there a God who created us? And there are three answers to that question. Yes, no, and I don't know. So the atheist says no, the agnostic says I don't know, but the Christian says yes. And that's not just wishful thinking, it's because of their answer to the next question. Has God revealed himself to us? And Christians answer that question with a confident yes. And that in turn prompts the next question. Has God revealed the purpose for which he created us? Again, Christians are confident to say yes. And purpose is what gives our lives meaning, and meaning and purpose shape the way we live. So the next question, does God show us how to live, which is ethics? Does he show us how to live aligned with his purpose for us? And the answer for Christians is again, yes. And that's why we hold the sexual and moral ethics that we do. That's the route we took to get to that position. We know how we got there. We know how we answer all the questions leading up to there. So let's go back to the start and look at the atheist agnostic. The question is, what's the route that they take to arrive at their position? What's the string of questions and the answers they would give? I think that means questions like these. Do we have a purpose, or are we just an evolved collection of molecules? If we have a purpose, where does it come from? If we have a purpose, does it shape our ethics? So is there such a thing as right and wrong? And who decides what's right and wrong, and on what basis? And with what authority? Can those decision makers impose their ethics on other people? If so, on what basis? So what answers go in this space for atheists and agnostics? Because here's how the Bible describes what goes in this space. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It's actually what the Bible calls sin. It's rejecting God and rejecting his authority. But if you'll bear with me, I want to also jump to the other side of that spectrum. I want to ask another question. What happens if I don't live up to my moral and sexual ethics? And Christians are the first to admit that we don't. So let's extend the question flow chart to the right. Are there consequences for my failure to live by these ethics? For Christians, the answer is yes. When we fail to live by them, we're sinning and God punishes sin. So is there a way of escape from that punishment? The answer is yes. Through his Son, Jesus, God has kindly given us a way to be forgiven. He gives us a fresh start. He gives us peace and clears our guilty conscience. But what happens down here for atheists and agnostics who don't live up to their ethics? Well, if you get caught, you might suffer some short-term consequences. But is there any way of forgiveness? Is trying to suppress feelings of guilt the only option? Is there any fresh start or peace to be found? Now, I don't want to put you on the spot by asking you to fill in this big area where the question marks are, but I'd be interested to know at which point in the top chain of questions you would say no instead of yes.